In this video, I'd like to look at JavaScript fetching a JSON file. I'm going to run two versions, which just differ in first by the structure of the JSON file and then the JavaScript that handles that. So the code can be found at this URL where this sort of little gap here is an underscore. And here's version 1 and version 2. Very much the same, except little differences in the data file, the JSON data file, and then the JavaScript that handles it, which I will be pointing out. Okay, so here we go. So let's look first just at what this little program does. Not much. I have a live server installed. Here are my extensions. I have the live server. So the live server is installed. I'll be using that. And I am opened the folder and I'm to my downloads. So this is in my downloads. Okay. So I've opened a folder. I've got the I'm open to a folder. I've got the live server. So then in the HTML, I can right click and open with the live server. Important because I'm reading a file from my web page. And then I just pick a dog at random, but then the user can also choose another dog and display information about the dog. Okay, so the JSON file. So in this case, the JSON file has a structure and starts with a curly bracket. Therefore, it's overall the contents of the JSON file is an object. Starting with the curly bracket means it's an object. That object has a property called dogs. In this case, it is the only property of the overall object, and that the value of this property, as denoted by the square brackets, is an array. So I have an object that has a property dogs. The value of dogs is an array, and that array, the elements of that array, are objects. So another curly bracket, so another object. And that object is made up of a bunch of key value pairs. So the key or name is dog name, and the value is bulldog, and then dog height and 15. This is height in inches. Okay, and then I have several such objects corresponding to different dogs. So that is the JSON file being read. There is some style. Mostly the style is about this grid structure, and then the HTML. So the HTML part of the HTML is, again, mostly just the grid structure. And then we get down to the JavaScript. Let me close the Explorer for a minute, make a little bit more room. This line is about adding a change event to my select. And so here's my select, has an ID of cell dog. I'm going to handle a change event, and the method is going to be select dog, which we'll see at the end. I am reading a file, and I'm going to read that file in a fetch, and I want the contents to be sort of available globally. So I'm making a declaration outside of the fetch, and I'm going to set what my contents of my the JSON that I grab from the file, and set this variable equal to that JSON. Okay, so here is my fetch. I'm fetching a file that is a sibling to my HTML file, the dogdata.json file. When it grabs that resource, there may be things like a status, like success or failure. And then if there is a success, then of course there is the contents of the data file. And I'm going to send that on to the subsequent then. And all I really want is the JSON from the response. And by announcing it's JSON, it will understand the JSON structure and treat it accordingly. In my second then, this data is the JSON that came from response. And I'm setting my global variable, my JSON, to that data. So now I have a global variable equal to the data that was in the JSON file. And it's understood. I don't need to do any explicit parsing myself. It's understood that it was JSON, and then it should expand and create whatever was contained in the JSON file. In this case, an object, property dogs, which was an array of objects. Okay. I want to load up my drop-down select, which was empty, with these dogs now that I've gotten from my dog file. So this is just me identifying the select from my page. It had an ID of cell dog. Here I am looping over the dogs. So again, my JSON is an object, but it has a property dogs, and that property dogs is an array. So then arrays have a map method. The map method, I'll call it the iteration, is handled by a function. And that function in this case has parameters or arguments. The first one is going to be the element of the array, which is an object, and then the second a sort of a counter as I'm going through an array. So I can think of it as an index. Create an object, set the text of the option, create an option, create an text of that option to be the dog name property of the object, set the value of the option to be the index I, and add the option to the select. Again, a map is effectively a loop over the array. It can be a little bit more than that, but in this case, that's effectively what it is. And then here I am, the values and my options were indices. So I'm going to set a value randomly. So using the length of my dogs array. So my JSON is an object, my JSON.dogs is an array, it has a length. And I'm using that to get a random number up to not including the length, which is the index of one of the dogs. And then I am dispatching a change event. So, or sometimes I'll call it triggering an event. Okay, so that was the fetch. So the fetch read the JSON, set a global variable equal to that JSON, and then loaded up options in a drop-down select according to the array contained in the object. If the user, this function can be outside of the fetch, even though it works with the data, it can be outside of the fetch because the user can't choose options until there are options, can't change an option until there are options to choose, to change to, and that only occurs after I've read the file. So this is sort of de facto after the file, so I am allowed to put it outside of the fetch. Other things involving the data, I probably need to put inside the fetch so that the program doesn't get ahead of itself. Okay, so if the user changes the dog, we come to this method, this function, and we're grabbing the value of the drop-down select, which serves as an index. I'm going to the my JSON object. It's only property dogs, which is an array, and getting the element with that index. So now I have an object, and I'm using properties of that object to set various inner HTMLs of my spans, and then the dog image property to set the SRC of my image element. So that was version 1. Again, in this case, the JSON was an object with a property dogs, which was an array. And my JSON was going to be eventually an object. Here's where I set it to be, the contents of the file. And here I'm looping. And so I need the array. So it was my JSON.dogs map. Down here, I'm getting the random number. So again, I need the array. So it's my JSON dogs length. And down here in the select, I again need the array of objects. So it's my JSON.dogs, my index. All right, now that was version 1, and now we're ready for version 2. So let me close up version 1, bring back my Explorer. That was version 1. Flip over to version 2. There's the HTML. There's the CSS, there's the JSON. So again, the CSS is nothing, mostly just styling of the grid. Here's the new JSON file. The big difference is that this JSON file starts with a square bracket. So it starts with the array, and so before it started out with an object, the object had a property, and that property was the array. And now in this style of JSON file, it's just starting directly. The JSON is the array. Okay, and then we'll see the couple of differences in the HTML, the JavaScript within the HTML to handle this difference. Okay, so here's the HTML with the JavaScript. Here is the same old grid. Here's the same old adding a change event. I've declared my JSON this time to be an array. I can probably just declare my JSON and it would sort of figure out that it was an array. But I'm just sort of mostly here announcing to myself that this is an array and forcing myself to pay attention to that. I do want to declare it, but I didn't necessarily have to declare it as an array, sort of as I set it to equal to data, which was an array, it would have become an array. But again, just to remind myself for the most part. I'm fetching the dogdata2.json file again. And so I'm going out to get that resource. When I get that resource, all I really want is the JSON from it. So again, not just simply the text, but the JSON, so that we're forcing it to sort of understand that what's coming in is JSON, and we're going to get out force it to understand that JSON structure. Let me close up my Explorer. So now I've set the global my JSON equal to data, and they were both arrays. I'm grabbing my select. I am again looping using the map method. I am looping over my array. And this is different here because before it was my JSON.dogs.map, because before that was the array, but now my JSON this time is directly the array. So it's my JSON.map. Create the option, set its text to be the object's dog name, set its value to be the index, add the option. Picking a random number. All I need here is the length of the array. And again, my JSON now is the array, so it has a length property. Get a random number up to not including the length, make it an integer, and set that as the value. That's a random index corresponding to a random dog, and dispatch or trigger a change event so that it looks like the user actually chose that dog, and that will call our function select dog. Here's our function select dog. We go to the drop down and grab its value, which is an index. Here's the line that changes. Again, my JSON this time with this style of JSON is directly an array. So we use the index that we just got directly with my JSON. And then the rest is the same as before. Once we get down to the objects were the same for both files. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you. So pay attention when you're reading JSON to the structure of your JSON to know, what you're starting with. Are you starting with object or the array? And then sort of adapt accordingly. So if, there are little nuancy changes that are easy to miss, but they're important. And so pay attention to the structure of the JSON file and write your JavaScript accordingly. Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to show you. Thanks for your attention.